Hello, and welcome to the Heartland Institute's Climate Change Roundtable, the show where we put this on every Friday at noon Central Time to correct the climate lies of the corporate media, inform you about what's really going on with the climate, and also have a lot of fun doing it. I'm your host today, Jim Lakely, our ordinary host. He's not ordinary, but our regular host, Andy Singer, is out today. He's actually on vacation, having a little bit of fun. But before we introduce our guests today, I would actually encourage you to go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to Climate Change Roundtable, actually the Heartland Institute's YouTube channel. That helps with the algorithm. When you hit like, it helps with the algorithm. And as you might imagine, climate realism is not something that the algorithms of Google, YouTube likes too much. But you help that by hitting like and sharing this video with your friends. And I hope you enjoy the show today, and we will see you here every week. And with that, let's bring on our guests today. We have the president of the Heartland Institute, James Taylor, who's been doing a lot of traveling lately. How are you today, James? You rested up?
Oh, I don't know if I'm quite rested up, but doing well. Always willing to fight the good fight.
As always, that's good to hear. Also with us is senior fellow at the Heartland Institute and the proprietor of one of the greatest climate realism websites ever made, Anthony Watts of What's Up With That in the Heartland Institute. How are you, Anthony?
Well, I'm actually a little chilly today because here in the West, while the heat wave is broiling the Midwest, the West is cold because, well, that's the way the jet stream works. No, it's not climate change. It's just weather.
That's right, and we will be getting into that as we're going to be talking about the heat waves in the United States here on this show today. And also joining us is research fellow at the Heartland Institute and frequent podcast guest on the In the Tank podcast, which we do on Thursdays at noon Central Time, but also a regular here on the Climate Change Roundtable. Linnea Lueken, how are you today?
I'm doing great. We are definitely over here in South Louisiana on the broiling side. It's overcast today, but it's still probably in the 90s, so that's just fantastic.
That's good. Yeah, if anyone could feel global warming, just like, which is also called summer, it's you down there in Louisiana.
Yeah, Louisiana sure. was downright frigid before coal power plants and SUVs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, down there in the swamp, not the DC swamp, but the real one. But all right. So I just wanted to, Andy Singer, our usual host, wanted to bring this up today. He wasn't able to host. But he wanted to bring up an issue or a news item that he had seen earlier in the week. And that's William Shatner, James Tiberius Kirk himself, captain of the Starship Enterprise, actually went up into space with Blue Origin. What was it, about 2-3 months ago? He became the oldest man to ever be in space at 90 years old. Good for him. But he said when he was up there in space for all of 11 minutes that when he looked down upon the Earth, he started to cry. He said he couldn't stop crying after a space flight because he was thinking of the climate crisis. I was grieving for the destruction of the Earth, he told CNN. It took me hours, quote, it took me hours to understand what it was, why I was weeping, he said. I realized I was in grief. I was grieving for the destruction of the Earth. And I'm filled with emotion about what just happened. It's extraordinary, he said. So, William Shatner actually has a bit of a reputation for a guy from Hollywood who spent his whole life in show business, not exactly being a not a climate alarmist, but certainly not a man on the left who just hates every normal thing in the world. And he actually stands up for free speech and pushes back at Twitter bullies. Linnea and Anthony, I know you guys are Star Trek fans. Were you disappointed when you heard that Captain Kirk looked upon the Earth and wept?
That it seemed a little strange to me, and I hate to jump to conclusions, and I haven't really done a lot of research on what he says he proposes the solution is. But I would call into question the idea of, opining the destruction of the Earth as you just took a rocket flight into space that put more CO2 into the atmosphere than the average 6 or 7 American families could possibly put out in a year or more, probably. I haven't crunched the numbers on that, but I have a feeling. And additionally, I highly doubt that the Starship Enterprise's warp core ran on wind or solar. So I don't know. It's a weird position to be in.
Anthony, I think you before we went live, you had a joke. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, basically, he's taken 50 years of masculinity as captain of the Enterprise and turned it into pansiness in the space of about 10 seconds.
Yeah,
Um,
they say it's a lot easier to destroy than it is to build. It takes 50 years to be the macho Captain Kirk, and only
yeah.
a
What we
second
should do,
of a
though,
peer.
I have a solution for him. Let's send his agent a copy of this book and see if we
Climbing out
get
of
a
glass.
rise out of him.
It might. Something that occurs to me, I can't recall ever watching Star Trek. Sorry about that. But I have observed, as far as these science fiction space type themes go in various shows, that time and space, time travel seems to be a theme that comes up every now and then. Planet of the Apes or whatever. So perhaps William Shatner, maybe he was crying because he came back at a time where the Earth is cooler than it's been for most of the period of human civilization, where it's cooler than it has been for most of the Earth's existence. Maybe that's the climate change he was crying about as such a proficient and prolific space traveler.
Well, what's ironic about it is that the idea that humans are causing a climate catastrophe is science fiction and not science. And so, maybe somebody can let them know about that. All right. Well, we got a lot of substance in the show to hit today. The title of this podcast, or the on the title card here on YouTube, is "We're having a heat wave," and I didn't include it in the title card, but ... and it's totally normal. At the Heartland Daily News, Anthony, you had a piece. I'm going to try to bring these up as you speak, but you had a piece about. You said a recent article titled "Reality Check: Are the hottest cities in the world becoming uninhabitable thanks to climate change?" by Dan Mitchell, a professor of climate science at the University of Bristol, tries to blame a record heat spike of 51 degrees Celsius in central Pakistan at the city of Jacobabad on climate change, which is simply incorrect. Mr. Mitchell called the 51 degrees Celsius number, quote, dangerously close to the limit of human survivability. Certainly, that temperature is dangerously close to the limits of human tolerance. And he went on to talk about other important temperature measures, something called the, quote, wet bulb temperature. And he says here, and then I'll let you comment right after this statement. He goes, and you said, Anthony, that he goes off the rails with this statement. Quote, but will climate change make this worse? Given the increase in temperatures, we expect more exceedances of the 35 degrees Celsius survivability threshold in the future. But these cases are likely to remain rare and only occur for a few hours at a time. We expect them to be limited to locations in the tropics and subtropics, and even then, only during certain years. We predict that the likelihood of these events significantly diminishes if we can adhere to the Paris Agreement climate goals. That is, limiting global average increases in temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, Anthony, you said that this fella says he's a scientist. And if he's a scientist, why is he wrong?
Well, he's right about the fact that, yes, that's at the limits of human tolerance. And humans, when you combine heat and humidity, they don't do very well. That's why there's the common old adage of it's not the heat, it's the humidity. And that's true. When it gets very humid and very hot, it's very hard to keep yourself cool. But the problem he's got here is that he's focusing on one city and using that as an example as how climate change may make this worse. And I would say that, okay, so let's say we rise 1 degree centigrade over the next 50 to 100 years, like the climate models are projecting. So does anyone really think that people that are going to be suffering in 51 degree versus 52 degree centigrade heat can really tell the difference? No, it's not going to make one hill of beans difference to that kind of suffering. But I will say that one thing he does, and it's a common theme amongst climate alarmists, is they ignore other things that are equally important. And why is Jacobabad the focus of this? Well, it's naturally hot. If you go back and look at the temperature record, and I have a graph in there, if you scroll down a little bit, Jim, you'll be able to see this graph that I put in there from NASA GISS, where they plot the temperature over the last 100 years. And look at that. This place has been naturally hot. The average temperature is between 27 and 28 degrees centigrade. Pretty hot, that's like 85, 86 degrees. And then there's a spike at the end. Well, that spike is from 1990, basically. If you look at that, it's been rising since 1990. And what's happened since then? Well, scroll down a little bit further, and you will see that population growth has just skyrocketed over that time. And in Pakistan in general, population growth has skyrocketed, and most of it has happened in the cities. Cities are giant urban heat islands, and that's what this guy has ignored. He's ignored the fact that cities are naturally hotter, as much as 10 degrees or more. So by ignoring that fact and basically trying to place the blame on climate change, he's basically outed himself as not an objective scientist.
If I can add a couple points here, Anthony's point about population is absolutely vital. The argument is, in the various media stories on this topic, is that it's becoming unlivable in Jacobabad. If it's becoming unlivable, why are people flocking to it? You would expect to see population numbers decrease, not increase, and they're increasing dramatically. At the same time, 51 degrees Celsius, that's 123 degrees Fahrenheit. So you had one event in which it reached 123 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, it may be unlivable if you're exposed to that for more than the brief spike of temperature one day of the year, and if you have no air conditioning or other climate accommodations. But the fact of the matter is, here in the United States, we have Phoenix, we have Las Vegas, we have places that are that high regularly in the summer, and it's not unlivable. It's not unlivable at all. And the final point is, whenever something like this comes up, even if we were to say that global warming played a big role in this, it's unlikely, but let's say it did. Even if that's the case, we do know for a fact by looking at mortality statistics for the winter versus the summer. We do know by looking at peer-reviewed studies about deaths caused by heat versus cold, that about 20 times more people are killed by cold than by heat. So if we're going to have this increase, this occasional spike in temperature, and if you want to blame it on global warming, and if you're going to say it's unlivable, realize that for every one person who might perish as a result of temperatures being too warm, you are saving the lives of 20 people as global temperatures rise, who otherwise would be exposed to colder temperatures. It's just people who believe in a climate crisis. They're just, let me see how we can play it out in the news today. Let's see what we can wamboozle in our minds and put it out there and just ignore the facts.
Yeah, they just focus on anything that supports their narrative, and that's what they did here.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the American Southwest, James, and there's a story here. And this is actually going through stories like this is exactly what you find on climaterealism.com. Our website's been around for, I don't know, almost 2 years now, James, I think, where we take the stories from the mainstream media and correct them because they're all from an alarmist perspective. And because, frankly, nobody really calls them out on this stuff. So here's a story from Yahoo News US by Ben Adler. Quote, the headline: "It's not tolerable anymore. Southwest residents endure more severe heat waves thanks to climate change." And it talks about how, Death Valley in California reached a record high on June 11th of 122 degrees. Las Vegas, where you love to be, James Taylor, the mercury rose to a record-setting 109 degrees for 2 days in a row. Oh, my goodness. In June? Go think about it. I don't know. Then the heat dome moved eastward with a high temperature of 96 degrees in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. And I will have to attest to this. On Tuesday here in Chicagoland, it was 97 degrees with a heat index of, I think, 105. I was by the pool, so I felt okay, but it was still pretty hot, and I actually enjoy the heat. But so the story goes on and on, as all these stories do. There are literally thousands of them every summer that talk about, when there's a heat wave, that somehow they're all getting worse, and it's all because human activity emitting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is causing all these things to get worse and worse, not just every season, every year, and every decade. And at this rate, we'll never, ever keep the temperature from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius, which was a number pulled out of the air by the Paris Climate Accord. Doesn't really mean anything. But at this rate, guys, we're never going to be able to keep the temperatures down because every year, guys, it keeps getting hotter. So let's maybe you guys can maybe think of your own, heat wave myths that we need to debunk here, because it seems like every summer it's always unprecedented heat and we're all going to die.
Well, right off the bat, if it's intolerable, why is it that the American people are moving from the northern states to the southern states? Why is it that in America and around the world, with the article that came out about Jacobabad and hot temperatures, I went through and looked up the 10 hottest cities in the world and then looked at what their populations are doing. The populations are increasing across the board. If it's intolerable, if there's this crisis that's making things unlivable, Why are people flocking to the warmer and even the hotter states and leaving the cold behind?
Yeah, why are there so many people living in Phoenix, for example? You know, it's just it's amazing how many people flock to Miami and Phoenix and other places that are warm. Well,
Well,
as James pointed out, cold kills. No one wants to deal with sub-freezing temperatures and snow, but you can certainly tolerate temperatures into the 90s while you're on the beach or at the pool or have air conditioning.
yeah, I mean,
I survived 115 when I was raised in California. I escaped in 1989. There's a movie coming out, I swear, Escape from California. That's gonna be a big one.
And for all the talk about how 51 degrees Celsius, 123 degrees Fahrenheit is unlivable.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to get very cold for people to die if they don't have heat. Hypothermia can kick in at temperatures that people live in all the time. So if you assume that nobody has air conditioning, nobody has water to drink, nobody has a fan or whatever else, sure, if you're exposed to that for long periods of time, but if you're exposed to 40 degrees for long periods of time, that'll kill you too. If you don't have the proper protection against the elements. This is something that you have to look at it both ways. And in the net, a warming world is a world which people like, as evidenced by population mobility patterns. And it's a world where fewer people die.
Right.
well, go ahead, Anthony.
I sent you a link, Jim. I don't know if you can get it up or not, but a few years ago, we had a conference in Las Vegas. The Heartland Institute held a conference in Las Vegas. And one of the questions that was posed was, well, why would we hold a conference in this really hot place? Because we're all talking about climate change and so forth, blah, blah, blah. Well, interestingly, the data from the Weather Service, if you'll scroll down just a little bit, I pointed out some records and so forth, and you can see that. But more importantly is the differences in temperature. And this really defines the whole issue with Jacobabad and heat waves in cities and so forth. Now, here's the average annual temperature for Las Vegas. And this is the graph that was prepared by the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Las Vegas. And as you can see, it's going up. It was basically flat up until about 1976. And then all of a sudden it started going up. That's the average annual temperature. Next graph shows the high and low temperatures. The average minimum temperature for Las Vegas has been rising steadily since 1937 and continues to do so today. Of course, this only goes out to 2012 because that's when we had the conference and that's when the graph ended. But the important point here is that the minimum temperature has been going up, but if you scroll down further, you'll see the high temperature, the hot temperatures during the day actually went down a little bit during that period and basically have been flat. And this speaks to what I have been saying for years and what we have published on in Climate at a Glance and also in our publications. And that is the fact that the minimum temperature overnight has been going up at cities because they retain heat in concrete, asphalt, buildings, and brickwork, and so forth and so on. Solar radiation comes in during the day. It heats up these structures, it heats up these surfaces, and then it releases the heat at night, making the overnight temperature warmer. And then that makes the average temperature, which they use to track climate change, go up. And so it's really not about it getting hotter per se during the daytime. It's about it getting less cool at night due to the fact that we humans have changed the landscape and the surfaces and so forth around which we live. And that's why places like Jacobabad get hotter. There's more structures, more buildings, more roads, asphalt, concrete, the whole deal.
Yeah.
And the climate left, the folks who are pushing the global warming narrative, they're the same folks who tell us that we should all be concentrated in cities to preserve more of the environment. If we're concentrated in cities, the cities are going to be larger, there's going to be more of this, and there's going to be an even greater urban heat island effect where the people live.
Right.
Right, which they can just point to as more evidence of why we need to give up more freedom. So down the line, of course. Well, and what I think is interesting too is you didn't see this in the news quite as much, although it did make some titles about a month ago, and continuing on now as the Southern Hemisphere is dipping into their winter season. Brazil has been getting snow. Brazil has been getting record cold temperatures, and as far north as Peru has been experiencing record cold as well. That doesn't make nearly the headlines that a heat wave in the desert Southwest does. It's really remarkable. I mean, there are far more people that are dying of cold while waiting in line or living homeless in forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, but Sao Paulo right now than anywhere in the United States or Europe. So I don't know. I don't give a whole lot of credit to when heat waves make the news if they ignore everything else.
Well, I mean, you guys have mentioned, obviously, and it's just, you could just see it. The population of the United States has been moving south and west for decades now, and it's only possible because of fossil fuels, which power up the air conditioning in all these places. You really can't sustain it. You can't have a population of whatever that is of Las Vegas area, probably 4 million people, 4 million people, if you don't have air conditioning. And the environmental left doesn't like you using your air conditioner, by the way. So where are these people? I guess maybe there'll be a mass migration north when the grids are not reliable anymore, and we can't have our air conditioner on anymore. I mean, here in Illinois, now I'd never heard of this before, but we've actually been warned already a couple of times. I've seen warnings that the grid is vulnerable, and that we may have blackouts and brownouts here in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest. So I'm sure I'm going to be getting alerts on my phone and from the news saying that, set that thermostat, even here in Illinois, even when it's 97 degrees, set that air conditioner thermostat to 75 or 78, because we're not going to have enough power in the grid to be able to make sure that you're comfortable, let alone survivable, because it's pretty hard to survive in the desert Southwest, if you're not really healthy without air conditioning.
I'm going to make a prediction, and that prediction is based on the fact that I've been in television for years, putting out tornado warnings, tornado watches, things like that, severe thunderstorm warnings. I'm going to make a prediction that sometime within the next 10 years, the establishment will start producing power warnings, saying that the grid is likely to be unstable, or we may need to, have some event or whatever this afternoon because of temperature or whatever. I predict that we will start seeing those kinds of things issued to our cell phones within the next decade, because the grid has been destabilized by the fact that it's too reliant on things like solar and wind, which are also reliant on the vagaries of weather on that day or in that hour, for that matter.
Yeah, and here in Illinois, Jim, you mentioned the warnings. Grid operators, energy economists tell us, brace yourselves for rolling brownouts and rolling blackouts this summer. They expect them. It's not just there's a possibility, it's expected. And why is that the case? Here in Illinois, the state legislature passed a law, and the governor signed it last year. The governor was encouraging this law. The law is that by 2035, all coal power plants must be shut down, and that by 2045, all natural gas power plants must be shut down. And of course, the utilities, energy producers, are not going to just go along their merry way running business as usual, and then one day all of a sudden, oh my goodness, we have no market, what's happening? No, they're going to start phasing out those assets now to avoid the shock of what's going to happen. And that is what the reason is, according to grid operators and energy economists, that we're going to have these rolling brownouts and rolling blackouts. It's going to have nothing to do with heat. There's always heat in the summer. We've had heat waves. We've had remarkable heat waves in years and decades past, and the grid has not been jeopardized. It's only something that happened in California. Now it's going to happen across the country, because it's not just Illinois that's doing this. And when they do, they're going to say, when this happens, they're going to say, oh, this is more proof that we need more wind and solar. No, this is because we're going to wind and solar.
This might be a good time for us to display that graph I sent you earlier, Jim, about energy consumption in the world. There you go. This is really sobering, because, we've been told now for 20 plus years that we have to move to wind and solar to save the planet and all this other nonsense. But what has actually happened? Well, you look at all the different renewables over there, biofuels, solar, wind, and they're just a speck in the total mix of energy consumption by source on the planet. We still have coal, oil, and gas making up the vast majority of energy consumption on the planet. And yet there's this pipe dream out there that we can basically eliminate, coal and oil and gas by 2035 and rely exclusively on wind and solar. Well, it's an absolute total fantasy. It can't happen. You look at the graph here and you see the progress that's been made on solar and wind. It's a speck compared to the rest of the things. It's not going to happen. It's a pipe dream.
That speck of improvement, if you believe in wind and solar power, it's not improvement, but in their language. That's coming almost entirely from Western Europe and the United States. And that's coming as a result of large-scale concerted efforts to expand wind and solar power. And yet it does absolutely nothing if the rest of the world is going to continue to utilize efficient, on-demand energy sources that won't destroy their economy and won't jeopardize our grid. We shouldn't be demonizing China, Japan, India. Well, actually, Japan wouldn't qualify. China, India, and third world nations for utilizing these energy sources. But we should realize that so long as they do so, which they're doing out of their own self-interest, accounting for all the factors, environmental and economic, then punishing ourselves economically, subjecting ourselves to rolling brownouts and blackouts, $5, $6 gasoline, rising electricity costs, all that does nothing for the stated objective of reducing carbon dioxide emissions, as if that were a problem in the first place. But it does absolutely no good until and unless other nations are going to do the same, and other nations won't do the same, and hallelujah for them.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this chart, I mean, some people might be listening on the Environment and Climate News podcast for this, but the viewers here on YouTube can see this wonderful chart that Anthony Watts shared with me to put on the screen. But Linnea, you look at that, and you see, it's a remarkable chart. It shows, how coal, oil, and natural gas take up an enormous chunk of this graph, and then you see nuclear, which is, I guess, kind of significant, but it could be a lot bigger. Hydropower, which is actually thicker than nuclear, and they consider hydropower renewable energy, obviously. But they're not building. When's the last time they built a dam in California for hydropower, Anthony? But 50, 60, 70 years ago? I mean, we don't build them anymore.
Yeah, the last reservoir that was built was the New Melones Reservoir in 1978, and they haven't done anything since because the environmentalists get all upset about some fish or lizard or snail or something.
Right. And then on this chart, solar and wind are as small as a whisker on a, it's insignificant. And yet, Linnea, our betters in Washington and all around the world say that we can and will transition into mainly solar and wind. We're going to have some videos on that here soon.
There's this line that you keep hearing that says, that solar and wind are overtaking fossil fuels, that it's going to be great. They're becoming less expensive. They're, whatever. Of course, what a lot of people don't realize is that when they're told wind and solar are becoming a less expensive energy source, it's because of, one, subsidies, and two, the price of oil and gas rising. So it's not that wind and solar are becoming more affordable to the average person. It's that they're becoming less unaffordable compared to oil and gas powered stuff. But you're seeing a good example of, and someone in the comments brought up the Texas grid shutdown from last year when it turns out that solar panels can't give energy to the grid when they're covered in snow. Well, it turns out that same effect happened in Australia this year, when I believe it was the Sydney area lost power for a significant amount of time because their wind and solar shut down during a major ice storm and cold snap that they were having. Well, what happened then was, because their energy prices are also skyrocketing because of their increased reliance on these green renewable products, their energy prices skyrocketed. And the Australian government came in and put a price cap on how much your electricity could cost. Well, the utility companies basically said, well, then I guess we're just not going to supply the energy because we can't operate on a loss. And the Australian government then said, no, you will, or else. So they're having fun over there right now with all of that. But they're having scheduled black and brownouts. And the Australian government just sent out a notification to their citizens, especially in Sydney, that they should not charge their electric cars because it will shut down the grid if they're all charging their electric cars every night.
Right. I was not on the In the Tank podcast on Thursday at noon Central Time yesterday, but I did participate in the chat. And if you watch the video, you actually see they put a lot of my comments up in the chat. But I had mentioned that if let's just say that by magic, we could just wave a magic wand and 15% of the cars on the road that are currently just regular gasoline cars are turned into electric. I don't think there's any way that our grid could handle people plugging in if 25%, 15%, maybe even only if you did just 10% of the vehicles on the road and made them electric overnight, that our grid would completely collapse. And yet they keep encouraging this stuff.
Here's the thing the environmentalists don't seem to get. They want us to push wind and solar, right? Wind and solar are the future. They're going to supply all the energy demands. Well, Solar only works during the day, right? And wind is mostly active during the day because of the temperature differences on the surface of the planet created by sunlight. Wind dies down at night for the most part. But that's when people are going to have to charge the cars at
Right.
night when they come home. They don't seem to get this simplest of things.
Yeah.
I keep hearing people say that every renewables, and I say that with air quotes because there's really nothing especially renewable about an electric car, but all these renewables people always say like, oh well, wind and solar overproduce energy sometimes. And what do you think we do with that? Do you think we're keeping it for later or something? Like,
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that's another thing. It's like we don't have the battery technology capacity to store this energy that you could make when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. Not to even if we did have that capacity, our friend Ron Stein, who's a policy advisor here at the Heartland Institute, he wrote a piece where he pointed out that you have to dig up 500,000 pounds of the Earth's crust to make one battery for a regular vehicle, say for like a Tesla, one car battery, battery operated car. 500,000 pounds of the Earth's crust have to be dug up. These environmentalists who, there was a time when being an environmentalist meant you cared about the environment, that you called yourself an ecologist, that you cared about cleaning up the rivers, the lakes, the streams, protecting endangered species, responsible land use and all that stuff. Now it's just become, one of our comments here calls it the hashtag climate cult. If they are never made to face, James Taylor, these environmentalists are never made to face the reality of the policies that they supposedly adhere to or want, right? That if you want to go all electric cars, you're going to be really destroying the earth, not fracking in a tiny little, you could go to natural gas powered cars. That would be crazy. Maybe it would be difficult. Yes, but it would be possible because we have basically an unlimited supply of natural gas and you wouldn't have to dig up 500,000 pounds of Earth's crust for one vehicle.
You hit it right on the head, Jim. And let me give you an example. There has been for many years a proposal for a mine in Alaska. They call it the Pebble Mine in southwest, I don't know, southwest Alaska. And this is a proposal in which the folks who would be building it have gone to enormous lengths to make sure that it is done in an environmentally responsible manner. I visited the site, and it's amazing how they've gone to such lengths to make sure that they have little impact on the environment, that they actually are concerned that the water, what little water that they discharge into the environment from the process, their concern is that they're discharging water that is cleaner than the natural water, and some of the minnows and small species in the water may not be used to it, so they have to add some back in. It's more than 200 stream miles from the Bristol Bay in Alaska, and yet EPA has shut it down, saying that it threatens salmon fisheries in Bristol Bay, something 200 miles away with state-of-the-art technologies. And it boils down to this. These environmental activists who talk about electric vehicles, who say that they're environmentalists, yet at the same time, how are you going to get your batteries? You're going to have to do some mining. And you have here in the United States of America, far away from any ocean salmon or whatever, far away from population centers, you have the most pristine environmental mining proposed in the world, and they shut it down. And so the only way we're going to get to this fantasy, and by the way, if we ever try to get to this fantasy, the rolling brownouts and blackouts will be constant, not just occasional, because the grid cannot rely on these intermittent sources for so long. But the only way we're going to do it is to excavate so much of the earth to get to these minerals, and metals are so important. And they're doing them primarily in China. They're doing them primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. Why are they doing it there? Because they're the only places in the world where people will tolerate such devastation to their environment. And let me amend that, not people, governments. Because if the people had to say, it wouldn't be done in China and it wouldn't be done in sub-Saharan Africa anyway. If you're an environmentalist, Jim, as you said, for years when we were growing up, an environmentalist meant that you were a conservationist. It meant that you cared about the actual lay of the land. You cared about water quality, air quality, and preserving the natural spaces of the earth. And this obsession with global warming and electric vehicles is destroying the face of the earth just so that they can have a billboard slogan.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a pretty good segue, I think. We're talking here about alternative energy. Alternatives to energy that actually works, actually, is, the way it should be thought about. There's energy that works, and then there's alternative energy that doesn't work. But we have record inflation. Gasoline is now, for the first time ever in American history, above $5 a gallon nationwide. When I left, I went on a little driving trip, 8 hours one way each way from Chicago to Pittsburgh. The gas, when I filled up to start my trip, was $5.69 a gallon. I found $5.09 somewhere in Ohio, which was nice, so I filled that up. But it hasn't quite hit $6 a gallon here in Illinois. But I know it's $6 a gallon plus in California.
It has in Chicago, Jim. I drove by it yesterday. $6.49 in some pumps.
There you go. So here we have record high gas prices, and the administration, they don't seem to be very sympathetic to the plight of ordinary people. President Biden is now, I think in a couple of weeks, is going to go groveling to the Saudi oil barons to have them increase production. Meanwhile, he's threatening American oil producers. He's shutting down drilling everywhere. Linnea, you had a piece that in May they shut down. What was it? They shut down the leasing. There it is, leasing in the Arctic and on the Gulf. So Joe Biden wants American oil producers to produce more oil, but he doesn't want them to drill anywhere. So how, is there like some kind of magic petrol elf that brings a golden barrel of oil on your doorstep at night? I mean, you need to get in the ground to get this oil out.
Right. No, that's the problem with this entire debate, is the fact that Biden does not want us to drill for more oil. He does not want us to produce more oil. He wants the media to report that he is asking oil companies to do that, while not making any moves on the federal level that would aid them in making those changes, so that people don't show up to the White House with pitchforks when gas is, $6-7 a gallon. I guess gaslighting that they've been doing for the last year on this issue is starting to crack, I think, because it's really difficult for people to wrap their heads around the idea that, we have all this oil and gas infrastructure, we have all this stuff going on. And the president is up there making big announcements and stuff, and nothing's happening. And, he's blaming the oil companies for taking too much profit, which is not true. But part of the major reasons, and I talked about this on In the Tank yesterday, is there is a huge bottleneck that has been simmering for decades now, and that's the refining bottleneck. We have not built a new refinery since, I think, 1976. Right now, our refining capacity, we are working at 91% of our refining capacity, according to IEA. So we could pump more oil right now. You could drill 1 million wells magically overnight. Couldn't actually do this, but you could drill 1 million wells overnight, and we would still have the same supply issue, because there's nowhere to send it. Right. Unless we start aggressively sending it to other countries, which we've done in the past. For refining, we send some of it to, I think, Mexico and Brazil. Mm-hmm. And but in terms of U.S. infrastructure, we have so many different bottlenecks, so many different choke points that do not allow us to produce more, and that control the prices to some extent. And the government knows this. The people, the experts that are advising Biden in his speeches and in his policy, they know it. Yeah. So I'm not going to let them get away with excusing them as being dumb on this issue.
Yeah. If you could, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was done.
Oh, okay. I mean, if you could convert gaslighting into actual energy, we would probably have the most solid grid anywhere in the world. So I want to play a couple clips here. So Jennifer Granholm, who is a thoroughly unserious and unlearned person, was on CNN, and credit to CNN, which is not usually challenging to anybody on the left of AOC or anywhere near AOC, but certainly not challenging to Democrats. Actually had her on and had her try to answer for the high gas prices and the kind of contradiction in messaging that the White House is sending out when it comes to gasoline and energy overall. So let's play this clip and have you guys comment.
From now, 10 years from now, Are you telling me you want them drilling for more oil? You want the refineries putting out more gasoline in 5 or 10 years?
What we're saying is today we need that supply increased. Of course, in 5 or 10 years, actually in the immediate, we are also pressing on the accelerator, if you will, to move toward clean energy so that we don't have to be under the thumb of petro-dictators like Putin or at the whim of the volatility of fossil fuels. Ultimately, America will be most secure when we can rely upon our own clean domestic production of energy.
But that's the
through
problem for
solar,
these
through
companies.
wind,
These
through
companies are saying, you're asking me to do more now, invest more now, when in fact, 5 or 10 years from now, we don't think that demand will be there, and the administration doesn't even necessarily want it to be there.
And let me just say, John, we really want to see us move to clean energy, but we also need to see this increase right now. And we are asking the oil and gas companies as well to diversify and make sure that that they become diversified energy companies to be able to produce other means of clean energy, because they have huge, deep pockets. They have a big ability to invest in the future as well as investing right now, so that we don't see oil and gas causing the inflation numbers and people being hurt every day.
So James Taylor, so President Biden is threatening to invoke some kind of phantom emergency powers to get more gasoline at the gas stations around America to lower the price. And they're berating American oil companies and say, okay, produce more oil with your magic Petro Elf or however you do this kind of thing. And do it right now. But we also want to bankrupt you in like 5 to 10 years and make gasoline cars obsolete within your lifetime as the CEO of ExxonMobil or Chevron or whatever. I mean, this is insane.
It is. And they say on the one hand that they want more oil and gas available. On the other hand, they are shutting down leases to produce more oil. They're shutting down pipelines. And then they try to justify it now by saying, well, it's refineries. We just need the refineries to produce. We're producing more than enough oil. It's not that we need more oil production. We need more refinery utilization. As Linnea said, so the latest information from the Energy Information Administration is for March of 2022. The refineries were operating in the United States at 91.3% capacity. That's the second highest capacity in the past 3 years. It's not that refineries, after investing so much money into their capital, decide that they're not going to make any money and just sit there and not do what they invested so much money into doing. Refineries are operating as much as they have in quite some time. The issue is this: if we're going to have more refineries processing more oil, you need to build them. So Jennifer Granholm says we need it now, and then says in 5 years we want to be totally disassociated from oil and gas production. Here's the thing: it takes about 7 years to build a refinery. It costs about $10 billion with a B dollars to build a refinery. Why would anybody invest that much money, knowing that by the time that they pay it all off and have a refinery going, the same people who vilify them, who demonize them and say you're the problem, are not going to allow them to operate? What we need is a policy that is one that's going to be consistent, that we can rely upon, and that encourages rather than discourages U.S. energy production and refinery.
Yeah, if we'd taken that $40 billion we just sent to Ukraine and put it towards refineries, we'd have 4 new refineries in the pipeline.
Well, yeah, and the Wall Street Journal had a terrific editorial the other day called, the title was, "Is $6 a gallon gasoline next?" And James Taylor's already answered, it's already here. But it went through in detail, and I'll leave it in the show notes after the podcast, about how, the subhead is the assault on fossil fuels has shrunk U.S. refining capacity. And they talk about all of the, James Taylor, part of the big cost of building a refinery is the regulations and the environmental impacts and all. It's an enormous capital risk to even try to build a new refinery capacity in this country. And it's the same thing for nuclear power, for that matter, that the government is the one that's getting in the way of us having more affordable energy. And, as we saw in the previous administration, there's a lot that can be done to make us energy independent if you get the government out of the way and loosen regulations. And, we're still keeping the environment clean. We're not destroying rivers and streams in the earth, but we are able to actually participate in a vigorous way in the global energy economy. But I want to play this other clip. On the In the Tank podcast on Thursdays at noon Central Time, I've been trying to find a way to get Karine Jean-Pierre, a clip of her from the White House. She's the new White House press secretary. I've been trying to get a clip of her to use because she's actually a pretty remarkable person. But I can't find clips short enough because she just goes on and she mumbles and she stutters and she doesn't make a point. So I did my best.
Blame her? Look what she's trying to explain.
I'll give you that. But so yeah, she's trying to explain a completely contradictory Biden administration policy, if you want to call it that, on energy, be it gasoline or electricity production. So I'm just going to play this, and then maybe Anthony can jump in or Linnea first. This is really remarkable, and I'm playing this because it just shows how indefensible what's going on at the White House in this administration is right now. So have a listen.
Drill more here in the U.S. though.
Because we don't need to do that. What we need them to do is, with the oil that's out there, we need them to refine that oil so that the capacity could go up and then prices would go down, inherently go down.
Is his priority lowering gas prices, or is it addressing climate change?
First of all, you can do both at the same time. What we're trying to deal with right now is how do we lower cost for American families. And one of the things that we are seeing currently right now with oil refineries is they are using this moment that there is a war in Ukraine to actually make a profit. When there are steps that they can take so that we can actually lower gas prices for families. And so the president has taken action, right? We talked about the strategic petroleum that he's done.
Yeah, so that's from our friends at Newsbusters. God bless them for that information. But good God, I mean, we're supposed to get more oil, but not drill for the oil. We're supposed to refine it more. We've already kind of gone over a little bit. Maybe we can get into deeper about why we're already at 91% refinery capacity, and they're still going back on blaming big oil for excessive profits. So they put that on top of this poop cake as well.
Disconnect.
Is like, even if they make money, they are going to they're going to put a surtax, like an excess profit tax, if the companies even make more money. So I don't know, kicking somebody in the face repeatedly doesn't seem to me a way to get them to do you a favor.
So Jim, 5 of the past 9 years, the oil industry has lost money. I'm not saying not even breaking even, not even making a little bit of money, but not enough to feed their families. No, they've lost money. They have supplied the vital energy that this country needs, and they have paid us for the privilege of doing so. And if you take that period of time, or you can go back further, whatever time period you want, pretty much. And if you say, all right, let's add up and then average out their profit margin compared to other industries, it's among the lowest of any industry in the country. And regardless of what time period you take, pretty much any time period you take, if they would have just taken their money, their capital investment, and instead of invested it in oil, in coal, in natural gas, and instead just paid the Biden administration's buddies on Wall Street to invest in the stock market, they could have sit on their duffs and made more money than they have by producing oil. And when finally oil prices go up, largely because of the Biden administration, and the Biden administration vilifies them for finally making profits to compare with their Wall Street buddies, now they say how horrible they are for doing so. The fact of the matter is the oil industry and domestic energy producers as a whole are paupers compared to most other segments of our society. The Biden administration should be thanking them, should be down on their knees thanking them for withstanding all of the years that they've lost money. For even now, even as they're making money, they're not even coming close to making up for the money they could have made just by sitting on their duffs, not working a day, and making more money in the stock market.
Yeah, the whole thing coming out of the White House is a complete disconnect from reality. I mean, it just boggles the mind. It kind of reminds me of the the statement from the government back in during the Vietnam War, where they said we have to burn the village to save it. That's the kind of mentality that seems to be coming out of the White House right now, with relation to producing domestic energy. And if they would just get out of the way, open up the leases, allow more drilling, and so forth and so on, the problem would go away. But they insist that somehow producing energy is evil, yet we need more of it. And they want it to materialize out of thin air. Maybe we should drill for unicorn gas or something like that. I don't know. It's nuts.
Well, and the oil field has always been feast or famine. I'll never forget sitting in my, freshman year intro to petroleum engineering class. And the first thing that our professor told us was be prepared to be laid off at least every 7 years, especially going in as an entry-level engineer or field hand, because that's just the way that it works. You have cycles of high and low prices, sometimes higher and sometimes lower than others, but it always rebounds in one way or another. So don't be a crazy person and buy a new Ford Raptor the second you get a new job with the oil field, which is something that a lot of people do, especially down here. You see that all the time. And you'll see it, when I worked offshore, if it was even a month-to-month basis, you get a couple of months of good prices, and all of a sudden the kitchen has, or the galley has better food. You get a couple of months of super low, or something bad happens in the oil field and they're not able to fund you as well, and you're eating rice and beans basically. So it has always been, and that is the case for the CEOs all the way down to the field hands. Especially when, as you were talking about a minute ago, they're operating at a loss for multiple years in a row. And I was out there during COVID, and that was insane. They had to put us up in a hotel for 5 days on some rigs and keep you there in your room for 5 days for quarantine before they allow you to come out to the rig. And the companies would rent out these entire hotels for staff and for medical personnel, like a little quarantine facility. And they did that for almost more than a year. So, I mean, it's insane to think that now, all of a sudden, that things are going, they're able to make a little bit of their margins back, that now they're price gouging and they're hurting us and it's their fault. It's not the case.
Yeah. And let's not forget the broader picture here. This is just one segment of the left's argument as a whole. It's that free market economies, citizen-run businesses, capitalism is horrible. It's evil. It needs to be eliminated. So you pounce on oil companies when oil prices are high, even though it's largely because of the Biden administration that oil prices are high. What's the solution? The solution is government either tells you what you're going to do, lock, stock, and barrel, or government takes over the oil industry, because you have folks saying they should be doing that. And the choice is this. Look, I think the American people understand this, although we have to keep repeating it because a younger generation who hasn't seen much of what we've seen. Do we want to be Venezuela, or do we want to be America or Western Europe? Which has succeeded, which has failed? Venezuela, the government owns all the oil production and the oil company. And what's happened? It's run incredibly inefficiently. They don't make any money. The economy's in ruins. The solution that the Biden administration and the environmental left are saying is that our solution is and should be Venezuela. That's what they want us to be. Well, we've seen what happened in the real world and what is happening today. That's not the solution.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up here. We're almost out of time. I know Anthony has to go to spread more climate realism on another program. It's okay that he cheats on this program once in a while, as long as it's off the clock on this one. But, it's just this idea that, when they say they don't want you to drive a gasoline powered car anymore, they mean it. They really do mean it. Yet they know that people they like their gasoline powered cars. They know that they are, they're cheaper. They know that they're reliable. But this is all part of the plan to make sure that they can reorder society. I mean, I've said this on the In the Tank podcast several times. It's like, you cannot fundamentally transform a society that is prosperous and happy. And you're prosperous and happy when energy is cheap and inflation is down. And so you can't transform a society that is satisfied. But, just as an example of how, we had actually a little debate in our Slack chat the other day. And I think the idea that our leaders are idiots, it's like, I don't think they're idiots, but they certainly are very silly. And I think part of it is you can see what they do. Now, I promised to play this because I want to infect your dreams and give you nightmares. This is a video. Our very smart and talented and competent Energy Secretary Granholm, not only was she a former governor of Michigan, but she is also the star of a music video. This was a music video put out by let's see, what was the name of the group? The group was it was just some environmental group. I just forgot the name of it now. Anyway, this is a video that she participated in, and this actually, I think, won an award at a leftist confab somewhere on the left coast. Anyway, I'll just play it and let you guys comment, and we can maybe even sing ourselves out of here.
Fossil fool, I reject your rule. We gotta leave you in the ground. I'm out of the door with my foot to the floor. We gotta leave you in the ground. Gasoline, gasoline, you're driving me insane. Gasoline, gasoline, the world's aflame. Gasoline, gasoline, I found someone new, someone better than you.
Oh, you know what's good if it's the saxophone?
Dang, that's good.
Yeah, take the bus. Kevin.
Polar bears are dying.
Oh boy.
Our children are crying.
Around the world, countries are racing to phase out gasoline cars.
Gotta go quick, electric. Change the way we move around.
Let's kill this. You're killing me.
Gotta go quick, electric. Change the way we move around.
That,
So
ladies and gentlemen, is your Energy Secretary of the United States in 2018.
Yeah, maybe she can get Nina Jankowicz from the Disinformation Board to join her, and they can do Mary Poppins tunes together too. This is amazing. You've got our energy secretary sitting here telling us that we need to get rid of energy. But if you were even remotely inclined to think that there might be some twisted logic in it, again, put her and Nina Jankowicz together. Let them do a duet. That's what I want to see.
This is a
Yeah.
consequence of the internet age, and we're going to see more and more of this. When people who are my age and younger are going to be running for office, we're going to be able to pull their TikTok history and stuff.
Yeah,
And we're gonna have infinite cringe. We might even be able to stabilize the grid with it.
yeah, it's true. Hey,
Yeah.
Linnea, this is aimed at your generation. You're supposed to be moved by that. You're
Ooh.
supposed to want to keep it in the ground. And
Well,
I think that, speaking of keeping it in the ground, I think what we need is a bumper sticker for our cars that says, "My other car is powered by liberal dreams. It's parked in the garage."
forever, right? Yeah. Well, sharp-eyed viewers might have noticed there's a pretty famous climate alarmist right at the beginning of that video clip, Mr. Bill McKibben. Haven't heard much from him and 350.org for a while. Last I heard, they were having some financial troubles. So let's pray that he's going to be okay. Thank you all. This will end the podcast for today and the show, Climate Change Roundtable, presented by the Heartland Institute. I want to thank everyone who is listening here. You can contact us. You always go to heartland.org. We also have lots of fantastic climate websites, one of the best being climaterealism.com, where we debunk climate lies in the media every single day. There's also climateataglance.com, and then the new book, you can hold it up again, Anthony, for the viewers online. There you go, The Climate at a Glance, for teachers and students, prominent facts on 30 climate topics to debunk a lot of the nonsense you hear out there in the media. You can get that for only $10 on Amazon.com while supplies last. Any last words for anybody? You want to say goodbye? You want to maybe a prayer for Bill McKibben and Jennifer Granholm for that video?
I would say that I want everyone to remember that this video is brought to you courtesy of Reliable Energy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for watching the show today. Please hit the subscribe and the like button and share this show with your friends. We're going to be here every Friday at noon Central Time. We love having you here live with us and listen to your comments. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.